There are people in your life who secretly enjoy watching you fail. You already know who they are. That friend who gets a little too quiet when you share good news. That coworker whose smile tightens just a fraction when your name gets mentioned in the meeting. That family member who always seems to know exactly what to say to make you feel smaller. But here's what you don't know. The most dangerous people in your life aren't the ones who hate you openly. They're the ones who smile at you, who praise you, who tell you they believe in you. And then quietly, systematically, without ever leaving a fingerprint, they pull you apart. Now here's the part that will keep you up tonight. You do the same thing. Not to everyone, not all the time, but there are moments you'd rather not examine too closely where someone else's pain made you feel just a little bit better about yourself, where someone else's failure gave you a quiet surge of relief, where you said something supportive, but didn't entirely mean it. You're not evil, neither are they. You're human. And that's the problem. For thousands of years, we've been telling ourselves a comfortable story about who we are. We're rational. We're in control. We make decisions based on logic. We're basically good people who occasionally make mistakes. But that story, it's a lie. The truth is, you are driven by forces you cannot see. Forces that operate below the surface of your awareness. Forces that were hardwired into your brain millions of years before you were born, before language, before civilization, before you had a name. These forces make you desire what you can't have. They make you envy people you claim to love. They make you wear masks so convincing that even you forget you're wearing one. They make you sabotage your own happiness and then blame the world for it. And the most terrifying part, everyone around you is driven by the exact same forces. Your boss, your partner, your best friend, your parents, the stranger sitting next to you on the subway, the influencer on your screen, the politician on the news. All of them puppets on strings they can't see. Think about the last time someone close to you did something that made no sense, something that hurt you deeply and seemed completely out of character. Maybe a friend turned cold overnight. Maybe a partner lashed out over something trivial. Maybe someone you trusted betrayed you in a way you never saw coming. You asked yourself, why would they do that? And you probably came up with an answer. They're selfish. They're toxic. They never really cared about me. It was all an act. But what if the answer is much stranger and much more disturbing than any of those explanations? What if they didn't choose to hurt you at all? What if the behavior that wounded you was automatic, compulsive, driven by patterns that were set in motion years before you ever entered their life? And what if the same thing is true about your own worst moments? What if the times you've hurt people, the times you look back on with shame and confusion weren't really choices at all, but the inevitable output of a system you don't understand and can't control? What if you could see the strings? What if you could look beneath the surface, beneath the smiles, the handshakes, the carefully curated social media posts, and understand what's actually driving people? What if you could decode the hidden logic behind their most baffling, hurtful, and self-destructive behavior? And what if you could look in the mirror and finally see yourself clearly? That's what the next 2.5 hours are about. We're going to descend into the deepest parts of human nature, the parts that make you uncomfortable, the parts you've been taught to deny, the parts that explain why people betray each other, why groups go insane, why success destroys some people and elevates others, and why the most dangerous aggression always wears a friendly face. We're going to explore 18 laws, 18 forces that govern human behavior. Some you'll recognize immediately. Others will make you reconsider everything you thought you knew about yourself and the people around you. This isn't self-help. This isn't motivation. This is a map. a code book for deciphering the human animal. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's begin. You like to think you're in control. You make decisions. You weigh options. You consider the evidence and choose the best path forward. That's what rational people do, and you're a rational person. Aren't you? Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked out of a conversation and thought, why did I say that? Have you ever made a decision in the heat of the moment that you regretted for years? Have you ever looked back at a choice and known with absolute certainty that your emotions made the call, not your mind? Of course you have, everyone has. But here's what most people never realize. Those moments aren't exceptions. They're the rule. The truth about human beings is that we are not rational creatures who occasionally experience emotions. We are emotional creatures who occasionally manage to be rational. And the difference between those two statements. It's the difference between a life you control and a life that controls you. Your brain is a machine designed for survival, not truth. It doesn't care about accuracy, it cares about speed. When you encounter a threat, real or perceived, your amygdala fires before your prefrontal cortex even gets the memo. You feel first, you think second. And by the time your rational mind catches up, you've already said the thing, sent the text, made the decision, slammed the door. The ancient Greeks understood this intuitively. They didn't have brain scanners or cognitive psychology, but they watched human behavior closely, and what they saw terrified them. Let me tell you a story about what happens when a whole civilization forgets this. It was the year 432 BC, and the greatest democracy on earth was about to make the worst decision in its history. Athens was the crown jewel of the ancient world, a city of philosophers, playwrights, and free citizens who debated their future in the open air on a hill called the Pnyx. On this particular day, 10,000 Athenian men crowded onto that hill to decide whether to go to war with Sparta. The stakes could not have been higher. Sparta was a military machine, an entire society built around warfare. Athens had money, ships, and confidence. A war between them would reshape the entire Greek world, and not in a good way. Both sides knew that a prolonged conflict could destroy everything they had built. The debate raged. The hawks were screaming for blood. Attack first, they said, before Sparta grows stronger. Show them we're not afraid. The doves pleaded for peace, accept Sparta's terms, avoid catastrophe, protect what we have. Back and forth, the shouting grew louder, emotions ran hotter, and no solution seemed right. Then an old man stepped forward. His name was Pericles. He was over 60, and he was the most respected man in Athens, but also the most misunderstood. Because Pericles didn't behave like other leaders. He didn't give rousing speeches. He didn't play to the crowd. He didn't tell people what they wanted to hear. Instead, he spoke like a mathematician laying out a proof. Calm, logical, step by step. He would build his argument so carefully that by the end, the conclusion seemed inevitable, not because he had shouted it, but because he had demonstrated it. What Pericles proposed that day was radical. Don't attack. Don't surrender either. Instead, retreat behind the walls of Athens, use the navy to control the sea, and simply outlast Sparta. Let them waste their energy on fruitless land campaigns while Athens grows stronger. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't heroic. It required patience and discipline, two things that are in short supply when a nation is gripped by fear. But Pericles wasn't asking them to be fearless. He was asking them to be strategic, to feel the fear and act rationally anyway. The Athenians agreed, and for a while it worked. Athens grew richer, more powerful, more magnificent than ever. Pericles used the surplus to build the Parthenon, a monument not to war, but to wisdom. His strategy was the embodiment of rationality prevailing over emotion. But then something happened. Pericles died, and without him, Athens lost its anchor to reason. What came next is one of the most terrifying case studies in collective irrationality ever recorded. The Athenians, the same people who had built the Parthenon, who had produced Socrates and Sophocles, began making decisions as if they were possessed. The restraint that Pericles had instilled evaporated. The patience he had cultivated dissolved. And in its place rose something ancient and destructive, the intoxicating belief that they were invincible. They launched a massive invasion of Sicily. Why? Because they were winning, because their confidence had swollen into arrogance, because the emotional high of success had disconnected them from reality. The Sicilian expedition was driven by the same impulse that drives a gambler to double down after a winning streak, the delusion that the trend will continue forever. The Sicilian expedition was a catastrophe. Tens of thousands of Athenian soldiers were killed or enslaved. The fleet was destroyed. The democracy never fully recovered. And within a few decades, Athens, the greatest city the world had ever known, was finished. All because emotion replaced reason. All because they believed their own hype. Now you might be thinking, that's an ancient story. We're more sophisticated now. We have data. We have science. We have spreadsheets and algorithms and Nobel Prize-winning economists. Let me ask you something else. Have you heard of the 2008 financial crisis? For years, the smartest people in the world, Ivy League graduates, Nobel Prize winners, legendary investors, convinced themselves that housing prices would never fall. Might not fall, could not fall. The mathematics, they said, proved it. The models were bulletproof. The risk had been distributed so widely that it had effectively disappeared. And they believed it. They really, genuinely believed it. Because they were making money. And making money feels like proof that you're right. The traders who questioned the models were told they didn't understand the math. The regulators who raised concerns were told they were old-fashioned. The few voices warning of a bubble were dismissed as pessimists who didn't understand the new economy. Sound familiar? It should, because it's the same pattern that destroyed Athens, the same intoxication, the same disconnect between emotion and reality, the same stubborn refusal to believe that the good times could ever end. It wasn't a lack of intelligence that caused the crash. It was a lack of awareness. The same force that destroyed Athens, the emotional high of success convincing you that you can't lose, destroyed the global economy 2,400 years later. The names change, the force doesn't. This is what we need to understand. Irrationality isn't a glitch in the human system. It's the default setting. Your brain is wired to favor information that confirms what you already believe. You seek out evidence that supports your position and dismiss everything else. You make decisions based on how you feel in the moment, and then construct a logical justification afterward, a story you tell yourself to maintain the illusion that you're rational. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, but the name doesn't capture how dangerous it is. Confirmation bias means that once you've decided someone is a genius, every mistake they make looks like a strategic choice. Once you've decided someone is a fool, every smart thing they do looks like luck. Once you've decided a relationship is worth saving, every red flag looks like a quirky personality trait. Once you've decided a political candidate is the answer, every scandal looks like a smear campaign. You don't see the world as it is. You see the world as you are. And as you are is emotional, reactive, defensive. But confirmation bias is just the beginning. There are other biases operating in the shadows of your mind, and they're even more insidious because they don't feel like biases, they feel like common sense. The sunk cost fallacy. You stay in a failing relationship or a dead-end job because you've already invested so much time. Walking away feels like admitting you were wrong, and admitting you were wrong feels worse than suffering. The availability heuristic. You overestimate the likelihood of dramatic, vivid events, plane crashes, shark attacks, terrorist attacks, and underestimate the boring, everyday dangers that are far more likely to kill you. Your brain doesn't calculate probability. It counts how easily an example comes to mind. The group bias. You adopt the opinions of the people around you not because you've examined the evidence, but because belonging feels more important than being right. And the cost of dissent, social exclusion, is too painful to bear. Each of these biases operates below your awareness. Each one distorts your perception. And together, they create a picture of reality that feels completely accurate but is systematically warped. So what do we do? If irrationality is our default, how do we escape it? The answer isn't to suppress your emotions. That's impossible, and trying to do it just drives them underground where they become even more powerful and less visible. The answer is much simpler and much harder. You have to slow down. When you feel the rush of anger, the surge of excitement, the impulse to act now, that's the moment to stop. Not to suppress the feeling, but to observe it. To say to yourself, I'm feeling something intense right now. Let me watch this feeling before I follow it. It sounds simple. It's not. Every instinct in your body is screaming at you to act, to react, to fire back, to commit, to leap. But the space between impulse and action, that space is where your freedom lives. Pericles understood this. He felt fear, of course he did. Sparta was terrifying, but he didn't let fear drive his strategy. He felt the impulse to fight to prove Athens' strength, and he chose a different path, not because he was fearless, but because he was aware. The Athenians lost everything because they couldn't find that space. Pericles had it. He was the rare leader who could feel fear without being controlled by it, who could feel ambition without being blinded by it. He cultivated what we might call an inner witness, a part of himself that watched his own emotions instead of obeying them. You can cultivate that too. It starts with something surprisingly small, paying attention to your emotional triggers. When does your chest tighten? When does your voice rise? When do you feel the desperate need to prove you're right? When do you find yourself constructing elaborate justifications for a decision you made in seconds? Those moments are maps. They show you where your irrationality lives. And once you see the map, you can choose a different route. There's something else, something that might be even more important. When you understand how deeply emotions drive other people's behavior, something shifts inside you. You stop taking things so personally. That coworker who undermined you, they're not really attacking you. They're responding to their own insecurities, fears, and frustrations that have been building for years before you ever walked into the office. That friend who made a cutting remark, they're projecting their own disappointment onto you. You just happen to be standing in the right place at the wrong time. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it changes your relationship to it. When you stop taking everything personally, you stop reacting. When you stop reacting, you start thinking. And when you start thinking, truly thinking, with the noise turned down, you become something most people never are. You become dangerous. Not dangerous in the way that aggressive people are dangerous. Dangerous in the way that clear-seeing people are dangerous. You can see the game. You can see the strings. You can see what's really happening beneath the surface of every interaction. And that kind of vision, it's the rarest thing in the world. But irrationality is just the beginning, just the first string on the puppet. There are more, many more. And the next one is something that's been quietly destroying your relationships for years without you ever noticing. It has to do with the person you spend more time thinking about than anyone else on earth. Yourself. How many selfies did you take today? How many times did you check how your post was doing? How many times did you refresh the likes? How many times did you reframe the shot not to capture the moment, but to capture how the moment would look to other people? Don't worry, this isn't a lecture about social media. This is a conversation about something much older, something that was inside human beings long before the first camera was invented, long before the first mirror was hung on a wall, long before the first artist painted a self-portrait and thought, not bad. It's called narcissism, and it's not a disorder that affects other people. It affects you. Now, when most people hear the word narcissist, they picture a monster, a toxic ex, a tyrannical boss, a politician who seems to feed on attention like a vampire feeds on blood. And yes, those people exist. We'll get to them. But narcissism isn't a light switch on or off, sick or healthy. It's a spectrum. And every single one of us is on it. At one end, you have what psychologists call functional narcissism. This is the normal, healthy self-love that gets you out of bed in the morning. It's the voice that says, "I deserve good things." It's the confidence that lets you walk into a room and believe you belong there. Without it, you'd never take a risk, never pursue a goal, never fall in love and think you were worthy of being loved back. At the other end, you have deep narcissism. This is the territory of people who have a hole inside them, a gap where a stable sense of self should be. They don't have an inner thermostat that tells them they're okay. They need the outside world to provide that reassurance. Constantly, endlessly, like a leaky bucket that can never be filled. And when the outside world doesn't provide it, they explode. Deep narcissists don't experience the world the way you do, where you see other people complex, separate beings with their own thoughts and feelings. They see mirrors, reflective surfaces, things that exist to confirm their importance or threaten it. When you praise a deep narcissist, you're not complimenting them. You're giving them oxygen. And when you criticize one even mildly, even constructively, you're not offering feedback. You're threatening their very existence. Here's what makes deep narcissists so dangerous in your life. They're charming. Not a little charming, devastatingly charming. In the beginning, they make you feel like the most important person in the world. They listen intensely. They mirror your interests. They seem to understand you on a level that no one else ever has. They remember details about your life that even your closest friends forget. But this isn't empathy, it's reconnaissance. They're studying you, learning what you need, figuring out what role you can play in their story, because everyone in a narcissist's life plays a role. The admirer, the rival, the enabler, the audience, the backup mirror in case the primary one cracks. And the moment you stop playing your assigned role, the moment you have needs of your own, the moment you disagree, the moment you fail to reflect them the way they need to be reflected, the mask drops. The warmth vanishes. The person who made you feel so seen suddenly can't see you at all. You become invisible, or worse, you become an enemy, not because you did anything wrong, because you stopped serving their purpose. Think about the relationships in your life that started with incredible intensity and ended with bewildering coldness. The friend who was obsessed with you for 6 months and then disappeared. The partner who made you feel like the center of the universe and then treated you like you didn't exist. The boss who recruited you aggressively and then froze you out. There's a pattern there, and the pattern has a name. Now you might be sitting there thinking, I know people like that. My ex, my boss, that friend who always makes everything about them. But here's the uncomfortable question. How often do you make everything about you? How often do you listen to someone talk about their problems and immediately think about how their situation relates to you? How often does someone share bad news and your first instinct is to tell a story about something similar that happened to you? How often do you walk away from a conversation and realize you talked about yourself the entire time? How often do you check your phone while someone is telling you something important? You're not a narcissist, but you have narcissistic moments. We all do. Because here's the thing about self-absorption. It doesn't feel like self-absorption when you're inside it. It feels like being alive. It feels like having a rich inner world. It feels like caring deeply about your own experience, which of course you should. But self-love has a cost. And the cost is empathy. Empathy is the most underrated superpower in human life. Not the squishy, sentimental version, the kind where you feel bad for someone and pat them on the back. Real empathy is something far more powerful and far more dangerous. Real empathy is the ability to step outside your own skull and inhabit someone else's reality, to see the world through their eyes, to feel what they feel not as a performance, not as a gesture, but as a genuine experience of connection that changes you both. When you're truly empathic, you can read people, not mind read, but body read, tone read, energy read. You can sense the tension in a room before anyone speaks. You can feel the hidden agenda behind a compliment. You can detect the loneliness behind someone's bravado and the fear behind someone's confidence. And here's the paradox. The people who need empathy the most, deep narcissists, are the ones who have it the least. They can perform empathy. They can say the right things, make the right faces, mirror your emotions convincingly. But they're not feeling you. They're studying you. There's a difference, and it's the difference between someone who genuinely wants to understand you and someone who wants to use you. The test is simple. Watch what happens when the conversation turns away from them. Do they disengage? Do they change the subject? Do their eyes glaze over? A truly empathic person stays present even when the spotlight is on someone else. A narcissist can only tolerate the spotlight when it's on them. So how do you protect yourself from deep narcissists? The first step is recognition. And recognition starts with watching for the signs. Deep narcissists have tells. When you challenge them even gently, they don't just push back, they rage. Not anger, rage. The kind of reaction that's wildly disproportionate to the situation, because you didn't just disagree with them, you threatened their existence. They turn every conversation back to themselves. You could be describing the worst day of your life, and within 30 seconds, they'll find a way to make it about their experience. They're extreme in their confidence. Not quiet self-assurance, loud, relentless certainty. They never doubt. They never apologize genuinely. They never admit they were wrong without immediately explaining why they were actually right. And they collect people. Not friends, fans. Not partners, audiences. They surround themselves with people who reflect their greatness back to them, and they discard anyone who doesn't. But recognizing narcissists is only half the battle. The other half is harder. It's recognizing the narcissist in yourself. When was the last time you genuinely listened to someone without thinking about what you were going to say next? When was the last time you celebrated someone else's success without a single whisper of, "Why not me?" When was the last time you were in a room full of people and didn't think about how you were being perceived, not even once? That silence, that absence of self-referential thought, that's the space where empathy lives. And cultivating that space is the most powerful thing you can do. Not because it makes you a better person, not because it's morally superior, but because empathy is the ultimate tool for understanding people, and understanding people is the ultimate tool for navigating life. When you can truly see someone, their fears, their desires, their hidden wounds, you stop being a victim of their behavior. You start being a navigator of it. You can anticipate their moves. You can lower their defenses. You can connect with them on a level that most people never reach. And the more you practice empathy, the more you realize something surprising. Other people's behavior was never really about you. That's not a bitter realization. It's a liberating one. Because if people aren't reacting to you, if they're reacting to their own pain, their own stories, their own unmet needs, then you don't have to carry the weight of their reactions anymore. You can just observe, understand, choose your response. And in that choice, in the moment between their action and your reaction, you'll find a kind of freedom that most people never experience. But there's something else you need to see. Something that makes narcissism look almost innocent by comparison. Because narcissism is about what people show you. What about what they hide? Behind every smile, behind every confident handshake, behind every "I'm doing great, how are you?" there's a mask. And under that mask, that's where the real game is played. Everyone lies. Not in the way you think. Not the dramatic, under-oath, pants-on-fire kind of lying. Something much more subtle. Something so woven into the fabric of daily life that we don't even recognize it as deception. Every morning, you put on a face. Not makeup, not a physical mask. Something more invisible and more powerful. You compose yourself. You arrange your expression, modulate your voice, adjust your posture. You become the version of yourself that you believe the world wants to see. Confident. Together. Fine. And everyone around you is doing the exact same thing. The question is, what's happening behind the mask? What's the colleague really feeling when she says, "Great idea," with a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes? What's your partner really thinking when he says, "I'm fine," with his jaw clenched like a vice? What's your friend really saying when she tells you she's happy for you, and her voice drops half an octave? Most people never ask these questions. They take the mask at face value. They hear "I'm fine" and they move on. They see a smile and they assume everything's okay. They watch someone perform confidence and they believe it. And then they're blindsided. When the colleague sabotages the project, when the partner explodes over something trivial, when the friend drifts away and they never understand why. But there's a man who learned to see through the mask, and he did it from a hospital bed, paralyzed with almost nothing left but his eyes. His name was Milton Erickson, and his story will change the way you look at every human being you meet. In 1919, Milton Erickson was a 17-year-old farm boy in Wisconsin when polio struck. Not the mild kind, the devastating kind. He was completely paralyzed. He couldn't move his arms, he couldn't move his legs, he couldn't even speak. The only thing he could control was his eyes. Imagine that. Imagine being trapped inside your own body, unable to communicate, unable to move, unable to do anything except watch. Most people would have gone mad. The silence alone would have been unbearable, not the silence of the room, but the silence between what they were saying and what they were showing. But Erickson didn't go mad. He went observant. Lying in that bed day after day, month after month, he began to notice things that no one else noticed. When his sisters came to visit, they said they were cheerful, but their shoulders were tense. Their breathing was shallow. Their smiles were just a little too wide, a little too fixed. They were worried. They were scared. And their faces said one thing while their bodies said another. When the doctor came to examine him, his tone was reassuring, but his hands were cold. His movements were rushed. And when he thought Erickson wasn't looking, his expression flickered just for a moment with something that looked a lot like pity. Erickson discovered what he would later call the second language of human communication, the nonverbal channel that runs constantly beneath our words, leaking our true feelings whether we want it to or not. Your mouth can lie. Your body cannot. When someone says yes, but subtly shakes their head no, that's the second language. When someone describes how calm they are while their fingers tap the armrest, that's the second language. When someone tells you they're not angry and their voice gets quieter instead of louder, that's the second language. When someone says they love your work and their eyes dart to the clock, that's the second language. And it's always there, always broadcasting, always leaking the truth through the cracks in the mask. Erickson recovered slowly, painfully, against all medical expectations, and went on to become one of the most influential psychotherapists of the 20th century. His method wasn't about asking patients to explain themselves. It was about watching them, listening to their tone, noticing their micro-expressions, paying attention to what their bodies were saying, while their mouths were saying something else entirely. He could tell when a patient was lying not because he caught them in a contradiction, but because their pulse quickened. He could tell when someone was about to open up not because they said so, but because their breathing changed. He could tell when resistance was softening not because the person agreed, but because their posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Erickson saw what the rest of us miss, and what we miss is enormous. Think about the last conversation you had that left you feeling uneasy. You couldn't put your finger on it. The person said all the right things, agreed with you, seemed supportive. But something was off, something you couldn't name. That something was the second language. Your unconscious mind caught it. Your conscious mind didn't. Here's what you need to understand about masks. The mask is not the problem. Everyone wears one. That's not deception, that's civilization. You can't walk around showing every emotion you feel. Society would collapse in about 20 minutes. The mask is a necessary tool for social life. The problem is believing the mask. The problem is forgetting that underneath every composed exterior is a chaotic interior. Under every confident presentation is a nervous human. Under every, "I'm fine," is a story you haven't been told. Under every polished LinkedIn profile is a person who has no idea what they're doing. So how do you read the second language? How do you see past the mask without making people uncomfortable? You watch. You observe, not in a suspicious, interrogating way, but in the way Erickson did. With curiosity, with patience, with genuine interest in the gap between what people say and what they mean. Watch the eyes. When someone's words say one thing and their eyes say another, always trust the eyes. People can control their smiles, but they can't control their pupils. They can rehearse their lines, but they can't rehearse the micro-flashes of emotion that cross their face in a fraction of a second, the fleeting contempt, the momentary fear, the flash of delight before the mask of indifference reassembles. Watch the hands. Tapping, clenching, fidgeting, these aren't just nervous habits. They're pressure releases. They're what happens when the body tries to contain an emotion that the words are trying to suppress. Watch the voice. When someone's pitch rises, when their pace accelerates, when they start emphasizing words they normally wouldn't, something has shifted. Something emotional. And whatever they're about to say is being driven by that shift, not by reason. Watch the contradictions. The person who talks about how much they value honesty while constantly telling small lies. The person who preaches about kindness while speaking to the waiter with barely concealed contempt. The person who says they don't care what people think while obsessively checking their social media notifications. These contradictions aren't anomalies, they're the truth leaking through. But here's something even more important than reading other people's masks. You need to understand something about character. Real character. The kind that determines whether someone will betray you, support you, or simply disappear when things get hard. People never do something just once. That's not a theory. That's a law of human nature. The way a person behaves today, especially under stress, especially when they think no one is watching, is the way they will behave tomorrow, and next month, and 5 years from now. Character is not what someone says about themselves. It's not their reputation, their resume, or their carefully curated personal brand. Character is a pattern. A repeating, compulsive, almost mechanical pattern of behavior that was set in motion years ago and has been running on autopilot ever since. Consider Howard Hughes. In the 1920s, he inherited one of the largest fortunes in America. He was brilliant, daring, glamorous. He made blockbuster movies, designed revolutionary aircraft, built a business empire that seemed to touch everything. By any measure, he was one of the most successful men of the 20th century. But there was a pattern. Every time Hughes acquired a company, Hell's Angels, Hughes Aircraft, RKO Pictures, he made the same promise. "I'll delegate, I'll let the experts run it." And every time, within months, he couldn't help himself. He micromanaged. He obsessed. He drove away every talented person around him. He couldn't trust anyone because trust required surrendering control. And surrendering control was the one thing Howard Hughes could never do. The pattern repeated for decades. In the 1940s, it was the Spruce Goose, a massive wooden airplane that consumed millions of dollars and never saw combat. In the 1950s, it was RKO Pictures, a once great studio that Hughes ran into the ground through compulsive interference. In the 1960s, it was the helicopter contract, another obsession, another micromanagement disaster, another trail of talented people who fled rather than work under his suffocating control. And at the end of his life, Howard Hughes was alone, in a dark room, surrounded by guards who followed his increasingly bizarre instructions, a man who had everything and trusted no one. The pattern never changed, not because he didn't want to change it, but because character doesn't change through wanting. It changes through awareness, and only through awareness. So when you're evaluating someone whether to hire them, date them, trust them, or follow them, don't listen to their words. Don't look at their reputation. Don't be seduced by their first impression. Look for the pattern. How do they handle disappointment? Not once, consistently. How do they treat people who can't do anything for them? Not once, always. How do they respond when they're wrong? Not once, every single time. How do they behave when they think no one is watching? That's the real person. Because the pattern is the person. And the pattern will repeat. The charming person who cheated on their last partner will cheat on you. The colleague who took credit for someone else's work will take credit for yours. The friend who lied to you about something small will lie to you about something big. Not because they're evil, because it's their pattern, and patterns don't break without extraordinary effort. Now, there's something uncomfortable about all of this. If character is a pattern, and if masks hide the real person, then the most important skill in your social life isn't charm or intelligence or even kindness. It's observation. The ability to slow down, to watch, to listen, to resist the rush to judgment and instead collect data, to see what's actually happening instead of what you want to happen. And here's the deepest insight of all. When you learn to see other people clearly past their masks, into their patterns, you develop something unexpected. You develop compassion. Not the kind of compassion that excuses bad behavior, the kind that understands it, the kind that sees the scared child inside the angry adult, the kind that recognizes the desperation behind the bravado. And with that compassion comes power, the power to protect yourself from people who would hurt you, the power to connect with people who deserve your trust, the power to see the world as it actually is, not as you wish it were. But masks and patterns are just the surface. There's something deeper, something that drives the most irrational, self-destructive, and mysterious force in human life. It's the force that makes you want what you can't have. The force that turns satisfaction into boredom and desire into obsession. It's the oldest trick in the human playbook. And you fall for it every single time. There is a hole inside you. Not a physical hole, something more like an appetite, a restless, gnawing sensation that's never fully satisfied. You eat and you're still hungry. You achieve and you still want more. You find love, and after a while you start wondering if there's something better out there. It's not a character flaw. It's a feature of the human operating system, and it's been running since the dawn of our species. In the early 1920s, a young woman walked into a cafe in Paris. She was thin, almost boyish. Her hair was short, scandalously short for the time. Her clothes were simple, practical, nothing like the extravagant dresses that fashionable women wore. Her name was Gabrielle, but the world would come to know her as Coco Chanel. Chanel didn't just design clothes. She designed desire. She understood something that most people never grasp, something that explains why you can't stop scrolling, why you can't stop shopping, why you can't stop looking for the next thing that will finally make you feel complete. She understood that the most powerful force in human motivation isn't possession. It's absence. Think about it. The pursuit is always more exciting than the capture. The anticipation is always more intense than the experience. The thing you don't have yet has a glow around it, a luminous quality that makes it seem infinitely more valuable than anything you already possess. And the moment you get it, the glow fades. This isn't a modern problem. It's not caused by advertising or social media or consumer culture, although those things have weaponized it to devastating effect. This is primitive, biological. It lives in the oldest parts of your brain, the parts that evolved to keep you moving, searching, wanting. Because for our ancient ancestors, satisfaction was dangerous. The ancestor who killed one gazelle and felt content was the ancestor who starved next month. The ancestor who was never quite satisfied, who always wanted more, better, different was the ancestor who survived. Evolution didn't design you to be happy. It designed you to be hungry. Chanel understood this instinctively. Her entire life was driven by an insatiable hunger. Abandoned as a child, raised in a convent, she spent her youth devouring romance novels, consuming stories of love and luxury that were as far from her reality as the moon. And when she finally entered that world, the world of wealth and beauty and desire, she found that getting what she wanted didn't satisfy her. It never did. She'd acquire the lover, the success, the status, and within weeks the glow would dim and the hunger would return. So she channeled that hunger into creation. She made things that other people would desire. Her genius wasn't in designing beautiful clothes. It was in understanding the psychology of wanting. When she launched Chanel No. 5, she didn't run advertisements. She didn't give interviews explaining why it was the best perfume in the world. She sprayed the perfume everywhere, in stores, at parties, in the dressing rooms of famous actresses, and then refused to explain where the scent came from. She gave unlabeled bottles to elite clients and pretended she didn't know what they were talking about when they asked. She created a mystery, and then she became the answer. She created absence. Mystery, the sense that something extraordinary existed just beyond your reach. And people went mad for it. They didn't just want the perfume, they needed it. Because Chanel had activated the most primal circuit in the human brain, the circuit that says, something valuable is missing, you must have it, nothing else matters until you do. Now, you might think this is just a clever marketing story, but the principle it illustrates controls your life in ways you don't even realize. Why do you lose interest in someone once they like you back? Because their availability has removed the absence that fueled your desire. The chase is over. The mystery is solved. The person who was a puzzle is now a known quantity, and known quantities don't activate the hunger circuit. Why do you scroll through Netflix for 45 minutes without finding anything to watch, even though you have thousands of options? Because the abundance eliminates the hunger. There's nothing you can't have, so there's nothing you want. The paradox of choice: more options, less satisfaction. Why do you check your phone 100 times a day? Because every notification is a tiny hit of something new, something unexpected, something that might finally fill the hole. But it never does, because the hole isn't designed to be filled. It's designed to keep you hungry. And this hunger, this covetousness, doesn't just drive your consumer behavior. It drives your relationships, your career choices, your most irrational decisions. The person who leaves a good relationship because they're convinced something better is out there. The entrepreneur who sells a successful company because they're already dreaming of the next one. The student who switches majors 5 times because each one loses its shine the moment it becomes familiar. They're not fickle, they're hungry, and the hunger never stops. And here's where it gets dangerous. Because this same force, the force that makes you desire what you don't have, also makes you terrible at seeing the future. In 1720, something happened in England that would be repeated in different costumes, with different names every few decades for the next 300 years. A man named John Blunt came up with a scheme. He proposed that the South Sea Company, a trading company with almost no actual trade, take over England's national debt. In exchange, the company would issue shares, and those shares, Blunt promised, would only go up. What happened next was a fever dream. Share prices skyrocketed. People from every walk of life, aristocrats, merchants, servants, even King George I himself, poured their money into the South Sea Company. They sold their land. They borrowed against their homes. They abandoned their businesses to speculate full-time. The price went from 128 to 550 to over 1,000 in a matter of months. Isaac Newton, one of the greatest minds in human history, invested and made a profit. Then he watched the price keep climbing and couldn't stand the feeling of missing out. He reinvested everything at the peak and lost a fortune. Later, Newton reportedly said, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." When the bubble burst, the devastation was total. Fortunes vanished overnight. Families were destroyed. The English economy was shaken to its core, and the same people who had been most euphoric during the boom became most despondent during the bust, their emotions swinging from one extreme to the other without ever pausing at rational. And the cause? The same force that Chanel weaponized, but turned inward, against the people who couldn't resist it. The present moment was too seductive. The numbers going up were too exciting. The fear of missing out was too overwhelming. And the future, the inevitable, mathematical, undeniable future in which the bubble would burst, was invisible. Psychologists call this short-sightedness, but that's too clinical a word for what it really is. It's a kind of blindness, a temporary, intoxicating blindness that convinces you that what's happening right now is all that matters, that the current trend will continue forever, that this time is different. It's never different. You felt this blindness, maybe not with stocks, but with relationships, with career choices, with health decisions, with anything where the immediate reward was so vivid that the long-term consequence became invisible. The person you knew was wrong for you but couldn't stop seeing. The job you knew was toxic but couldn't leave because the money was good. The argument you knew you should walk away from but couldn't stop fueling because being right felt too good in the moment. The purchase you couldn't afford but made anyway because the desire was louder than the math. Short-sightedness isn't a lack of intelligence. Isaac Newton wasn't stupid. The Athenians weren't stupid. The investors of 2008 weren't stupid. You're not stupid. It's a lack of perspective. The ability to step back from the present moment and see the larger pattern. The ability to ask, where is this heading? Not how does this feel right now? But what will this look like in 5 years? In 10? At the end of my life? That perspective doesn't come naturally. Your brain is wired to prioritize the present, the vivid, the emotional, the immediate. But you can cultivate it. You can train yourself to look up from the current moment and scan the horizon. To ask not just, what do I want now? But what will I wish I had done when I look back on this moment? And when you do, something remarkable happens. The noise fades. The urgency diminishes. You start to see patterns that other people miss, trends that are obvious in hindsight but invisible to anyone trapped in the present moment. You become the person who didn't buy into the bubble, who didn't walk into the trap, who saw the crash coming while everyone else was still celebrating. But desire and short-sightedness aren't the only forces that blind you. There's another one that's even more insidious because it disguises itself as wisdom. It's the force that makes people resist you. That makes them dig in their heels the moment you try to change their mind. That turns every conversation into a battle and every suggestion into a threat. And it's controlling your relationships right now. You just don't know it yet. Try to remember the last time you changed someone's mind. Not the last time you argued with someone. Not the last time you presented evidence, made a logical case, and walked away feeling like you won the intellectual battle. I mean the last time someone actually changed their position genuinely, authentically changed what they believed because of something you said. Can't remember? That's because it almost never happens. And it's not because you're not persuasive. It's not because your arguments aren't good enough. It's because of something much deeper, something that operates in every human being like a fortress wall around their beliefs. When you challenge someone, their opinion, their behavior, their worldview, you're not just disagreeing with them. You're threatening them. Not physically, not even intellectually. You're threatening their sense of self. Every person carries inside them a story about who they are, a narrative that makes sense of their choices, justifies their behavior, and gives them a feeling of autonomy, of being in control of their own life. That narrative is their most precious possession. It's the foundation of their identity. And when you try to change someone's mind, what they hear beneath the words, beneath the logic, beneath the carefully constructed argument is, "Your story is wrong. You're wrong. You don't know yourself." Their response isn't intellectual, it's survival. They dig in, they push back. They find reasons to dismiss your argument, not because your logic is flawed, but because accepting it would mean surrendering part of their identity. And surrendering identity feels like death. The harder you push, the deeper they dig. The more evidence you present, the more they reinterpret it to fit their existing worldview. The more reasonable you try to be, the more unreasonable they become. Now, there was a man who understood this so deeply that he turned it into the most remarkable political career in American history. His name was Lyndon Johnson, and when he first arrived in the United States Senate in 1949, he was a nobody, a young congressman from Texas with a reputation for being loud, crude, and overbearing. The Senate was an exclusive club. Senior senators had been there for decades. They had their own traditions, their own hierarchy, their own way of doing things, and they had no use for some brash young Texan who thought he could change the world. Most young senators would have done one of two things: either fought for attention, made speeches, picked battles, tried to prove themselves, or kept their heads down and waited their turn. Johnson did neither. He went to the older senators and asked for advice. Not as a performance, not as a political strategy, at least, not only as a political strategy. He genuinely wanted to learn, and more importantly, he understood something that most people never grasp about influence. People don't resist you when you make them feel important. They resist you when you make them feel small. Johnson would visit Richard Russell, the most powerful senator in Washington, a man known for his coldness and reserve, a man who had built walls around himself that no one could penetrate and sit in his office for hours. He wouldn't talk about legislation. He wouldn't push his agenda. He would just listen, ask questions, express genuine admiration for Russell's experience and wisdom. He learned that Russell was lonely, that the most powerful man in the Senate ate dinner alone most nights, that beneath the icy exterior was a man who craved connection, but had been trained by a lifetime of political warfare to trust no one. And Johnson gave him what he needed: not flattery, which Russell would have seen through instantly, but genuine attention, genuine respect, the feeling of being truly heard by someone who valued what he had to say. Russell, the man who trusted no one, who had built walls around himself that no one could penetrate, slowly opened up. He began to see Johnson not as a rival or a nuisance, but as a protege, someone who valued what Russell had spent a lifetime building. And when Johnson finally needed something, when he asked Russell for support on a crucial vote, Russell gave it, not because he was tricked, because he wanted to. Because Johnson had made him feel like the decision was his own. That's the key. The most powerful form of influence isn't persuasion. It's creating the conditions where people want to help you, where supporting you feels like their idea, where agreeing with you reinforces their self-image instead of threatening it. Most people do the opposite. They argue, they lecture, they present evidence. They say, "You're wrong and here's why." And every word they speak builds the wall higher. The person who masters influence does something radically different. They don't attack the wall. They walk around it. They start with warmth, with genuine interest, with the radical act of making the other person feel seen and valued before asking for anything. They confirm the other person's self-opinion. If someone sees themselves as smart, they make them feel smarter. If someone sees themselves as generous, they create opportunities for them to be generous. If someone sees themselves as independent, they frame their request in a way that preserves that independence. They never, ever make someone feel like they're giving in. Because giving in feels like losing, and no one wants to lose. But there's a deeper layer to this. A layer that has nothing to do with influencing others and everything to do with what's happening inside you. Because the same defensiveness that makes other people resist you. You have it too. And it's not just making you hard to influence, it's making you sabotage your own life. Think about it. How often have you walked into a situation already bracing for a fight? How often have you interpreted a neutral comment as an attack? How often have you assumed the worst about someone's intentions and then acted as if your assumption was a fact? How often have you created the very conflict you were trying to avoid? There's a man who understood this better than almost anyone in history, and he learned it the hardest way possible. His name was Anton Chekhov. He was born in Russia in 1860, the son of a man who beat him regularly not out of malice, but out of a tyrannical conviction that discipline required violence. By the time Chekhov was 16, his father had abandoned the family, leaving Anton to fend for himself and support his younger siblings. Every circumstance of Chekhov's life pointed toward bitterness. His brothers succumbed to it. One became an alcoholic, another drifted through life in a haze of resentment and self-pity. The pattern was set. A brutal childhood produces a brutal adulthood. Victims become victimizers. The cycle repeats, generation after generation, world without end. But Chekhov made a choice. Not a dramatic, cinematic choice. Not a moment of revelation where the music swells and the camera zooms in. A quiet, daily, almost invisible choice. He chose to see his father not as a monster, but as a man. A limited man. A frightened man. A man who was himself a victim of circumstances he couldn't control, a man who had been beaten by his own father, who had never known gentleness, who was passing on a trauma he didn't understand. That reframe didn't excuse what his father had done, but it freed Chekhov from the hatred that would have consumed him, and with that freedom came something unexpected: energy. The energy that other people spent on resentment, Chekhov spent on creation. He became a doctor, a writer, a supporter of his family, a man who found humor in the darkest situations and compassion for the most difficult people. His plays, The Seagull, Uncle Vanya, The Cherry Orchard, are masterpieces of empathy. Characters who are bitter, petty, selfish, ridiculous, and yet somehow lovable, because Chekhov saw them from the inside. He understood that even the most infuriating people are suffering in ways they can't articulate. What Chekhov discovered is something that sounds almost too simple to be true, but it is perhaps the most powerful psychological insight in existence. Your attitude creates your reality. Not in a wishful thinking, manifest your dreams kind of way. In a brutal, mechanical, cause and effect kind of way. If your attitude is closed, if you approach the world with suspicion, defensiveness, and the expectation that people will hurt you, you will create the very circumstances you fear. You'll alienate people who could help you. You'll miss opportunities that are right in front of you. You'll interpret neutral events as confirmations of your worst beliefs. You'll push people away, and then use their absence as proof that you were right not to trust them. And you'll call it being realistic. But if your attitude is open, if you approach the world with curiosity, with a willingness to be surprised, with the assumption that adversity contains hidden gifts, something different happens. You see solutions that the closed mind can't see. You attract people who are drawn to your energy. You turn obstacles into fuel. You find allies in unexpected places. This isn't positive thinking, it's strategic thinking. It's recognizing that your attitude isn't a passive lens through which you view the world. It's an active force that shapes what happens to you. And unlike almost everything else in life, it's one of the few things you can actually control. Chekhov called it work and love, 2 words. Work, the practice of channeling your energy into something productive rather than destructive. Love, the practice of seeing people as they are, not as you fear them to be. It sounds gentle, it isn't. It's the hardest work there is, because it requires you to confront your own defensiveness, your own negativity, your own tendency to create the very prison you're trying to escape. But when you do that work, when you break through your own wall, you become something that most people never are. Free. But there's a wall even deeper than defensiveness. One that doesn't just block you from other people, it blocks you from yourself. Because beneath the person you think you are, there's someone else entirely. Someone darker, and that someone has been running your life from the shadows. You are not who you think you are. The person you call me, the kind one, the reasonable one, the one who tries to do the right thing, that's only half the story. Maybe less than half. Because inside you right now there is another self, a self you don't acknowledge, a self you've spent your entire life pretending doesn't exist. It's the part of you that enjoys seeing someone fail, the part that feels a thrill when a beautiful person gets humiliated, the part that thinks thoughts so dark you can barely admit them to yourself, and then immediately buries them so deep that you convince yourself they never happened. The part that, in your worst moments, likes the sound of other people's pain. Carl Jung called it the shadow. And he said something about it that most people find too disturbing to accept. The shadow isn't a minor part of you. It's a massive part of you. Everything you've repressed, denied, or refused to acknowledge about yourself, every selfish impulse, every cruel fantasy, every petty jealousy, every forbidden desire, it doesn't disappear. It accumulates, and it builds a second personality inside you. A personality that operates without your permission, without your awareness, and often without your control. Nowhere is this more visible, more spectacularly, horrifyingly visible, than in the story of Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon wanted to be great. That was his deepest ambition, to be remembered as a peacemaker, a statesman, a president who opened China and ended the Vietnam War. And he came remarkably close to achieving it. By 1972, he had done what no president before him had managed. He had visited communist China, negotiated arms control with the Soviet Union, and was on the verge of ending American involvement in Vietnam. But there was another Nixon. A Nixon who was consumed by paranoia. A Nixon who kept an enemies list not as a political tool, but as an obsession. A Nixon who ranted about the press, about Jews, about the East Coast elite who had never accepted him. A Nixon who authorized illegal wiretaps, campaign sabotage, and the break-in at the Watergate Hotel that would ultimately destroy his presidency. The two Nixons were not separate people. They were the same person, one conscious, one unconscious. One who genuinely believed in peace and diplomacy, and one who saw enemies everywhere and was driven to destroy them. One who wanted to be loved by history, and one who was consumed by hatred of the people who he believed had denied him love. And the more the conscious Nixon denied the dark one, the more powerful the dark one became. Here's the most revealing detail of the entire Watergate saga. Nixon installed a secret taping system in the White House to record his own conversations. He said it was for history, so that future generations could study his greatness, his diplomatic genius, his masterful leadership. But those tapes didn't record greatness. They recorded the shadow. Late-night conversations filled with rage and paranoia, racist rants, vengeful plots. The unfiltered voice of a man's dark side, captured on tape because the conscious man was too blind to see what he was recording. He thought he was preserving his legacy. Instead, he was documenting his own destruction. Nixon's shadow destroyed him, but here's what you need to understand. You have the same structure inside you. Everyone does. Maybe your shadow isn't as dramatic as Nixon's. Maybe it doesn't involve enemies' lists and illegal wiretaps and audio recordings of your own paranoia. But it's there. And it leaks out in ways you don't notice, in cutting remarks you claim were jokes, in passive-aggressive silences you call needing space, in patterns of behavior that keep showing up in your life despite your best efforts to stop them. The most important thing to know about the shadow is this. What you repress doesn't disappear, it intensifies. When you deny your anger, it doesn't go away, it turns into depression. That heaviness you feel, that gray fog that descends over your life, that's often anger you've refused to feel, turned inward against yourself. When you deny your selfishness, it doesn't vanish, it turns into martyrdom. The person who sacrifices everything for others and then silently resents them for it, that's repressed selfishness, wearing the mask of generosity. When you deny your capacity for cruelty, it doesn't evaporate, it leaks out as passive aggression, disguised so cleverly that even you can't recognize it. The helpful comment that undermines someone's confidence, the innocent question that exposes a weakness, the casual observation that plants a seed of doubt. And the people around you, they can see it, they can feel it. Even if they can't name it, they sense something off about you, something inauthentic, something contradictory. The person who insists they never get angry, the person who claims they have no selfish bone in their body, the person who presents themselves as purely good, purely kind, purely selfless. That purity is the mask, and the shadow is what's behind it. There's a simple rule for detecting the shadow in others and in yourself. The rule is this: the most overt trait someone displays is often covering up its exact opposite. The person who talks constantly about how honest they are, watch for the lies. The person who preaches about family values, watch for the secret life. The person who never stops talking about their integrity, watch for the compromise they're about to make. Not because they're hypocrites, although they are, but because the loud insistence on a virtue is often the conscious mind's desperate attempt to drown out the shadow's opposite impulse. The more someone protests their goodness, the more you should look for what they're hiding from themselves. But the shadow isn't just a source of destruction, it's also a source of energy. Every impulse you've repressed, every quality you've denied, it's all fuel. Creative fuel, vital fuel. The energy that powers artists, innovators, and leaders who aren't afraid to access the full spectrum of their humanity. The person who integrates their shadow, who acknowledges their darkness instead of pretending it doesn't exist, becomes something rare and magnetic. They radiate authenticity, not because they're perfect, but because they're whole. And wholeness is far more compelling than perfection. There's a simple test for shadow leakage. Look at the people who irritate you most, the ones who make your skin crawl, the ones you can't stand to be around, the ones whose very existence seems like a personal affront. Now ask yourself, what quality do they have that you've been denying in yourself? Because the shadow has a favorite trick, projection. It takes the qualities you refuse to see in yourself and projects them onto other people. The person who disgusts you most is often carrying a part of you that you've exiled. This doesn't mean your disgust is always wrong. Some people are genuinely terrible. But the intensity of your reaction, the visceral, disproportionate, can't stop thinking about it intensity, that's the shadow talking. And it's trying to tell you something about yourself that you've been refusing to hear. The integrated human, the person who has done the work of confronting their shadow, is the most dangerous person in any room. Not dangerous because they're dark, dangerous because they're complete. They can't be manipulated through guilt because they've already acknowledged their capacity for selfishness. They can't be shamed because they've already faced their darkest impulses. They can't be controlled through fear of exposure because they've already exposed themselves to themselves. And they have access to a kind of energy, a raw, primal, creative energy that the repressed person can only dream of. The energy that was previously spent maintaining the mask is now available for creation. for connection, for living fully. But the shadow isn't the only thing hiding beneath the surface. There's another force, one that might be even more destructive because unlike the shadow, which operates in private, this one operates between people, in the space where friendship should live, in the gap between admiration and annihilation. It's the quietest, most denied emotion in the human repertoire. And it's destroying relationships you think are safe. Nobody admits to envy. Think about that for a moment. People will confess to anger. They'll acknowledge greed. They'll even reluctantly, with eyes cast downward, admit to lust. But envy. Envy is the emotion that must not be named. Because admitting envy means admitting inferiority. It means looking at someone else's life, their success, their beauty, their talent, their happiness, and feeling a pain so sharp that it borders on hatred. And then in the same breath, admitting that you wish you had what they have. That's not a comfortable thing to confess. So instead, we dress envy in other clothes. We call it concern. I'm just worried about them. We call it fairness. It's not right that they got that promotion. We call it criticism. Their success is overrated. We call it humor. Must be nice, right? We call it justice. They don't deserve what they have. But underneath the costume, it's always the same thing, the pain of comparison. The quiet, corrosive agony of measuring yourself against someone else and coming up short. And it's everywhere. In 1822, a young woman named Mary Shelley was grieving. Her husband, the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, had drowned in Italy, and she was alone, bereft, struggling to hold herself together in the aftermath of an unimaginable loss. She had already endured more tragedy by the age of 25 than most people experience in a lifetime: the deaths of 3 children, the scandal of her unconventional relationship, the weight of being the daughter of 2 radical philosophers who had abandoned her. Into this void stepped Jane Williams. Jane was the wife of Edward Williams, a close friend of Percy's who had died in the same boating accident. Jane and Mary shared a bond, or so Mary thought. 2 women, both widowed by the same tragedy, drawn together by grief. What could be more natural? But something was wrong. Mary began to notice that Jane stared at her not with sympathy, but with something harder, a kind of measurement. Jane would compliment Mary's writing in a way that felt less like admiration and more like assessment, weighing it, comparing it, finding it wanting against some internal standard. She would insert herself into Mary's social circle, gradually building relationships with Mary's friends, positioning herself as an alternative, a rival dressed as a companion. She would offer Mary advice that was subtly undermining, suggesting she give up writing, suggesting she send her child away, suggesting that her grief was excessive and her ambitions were unrealistic. Over time, Jane's behavior escalated. She turned mutual friends against Mary with careful, plausible criticisms. She positioned herself as the more sympathetic, more reasonable, more deserving widow. Each act was small enough to plausibly deny. Each act was designed to erode Mary's confidence, her support system, her sense of self. And all of it, every calculated move, every veiled insult, every strategic friendship was driven by envy. Jane envied Mary's intellect. She envied Mary's literary fame. Frankenstein had made Mary famous at 20. She envied the place Mary held in the world that Jane believed she deserved instead. But Jane would never have admitted it, because envy never admits its name. Now you might be thinking, that's a story from 200 years ago. People are more evolved now. Are they? Open your phone, scroll through your feed. Watch the parade of accomplishments, vacations, engagements, promotions, and perfectly curated moments of happiness. Now pay attention to what happens inside your body. That tiny contraction in your chest when you see someone's good news. That microsecond of something not quite happiness for them, not quite sadness for you, something in between. Something uncomfortable. Something you quickly scroll past so you don't have to feel it. That's envy. And it's not a character flaw. It's a biological response. Your brain is a comparison machine. It was built to measure your status relative to the people around you. Because in the ancient world, your position in the group determined whether you survived or got cast out. The hunter-gatherer who didn't care about status was the one who got the worst food, the worst shelter, and the least desirable mates. So when you see someone who has more success, more beauty, more attention, more money, your brain registers it as a threat. Not a literal threat, a status threat. And it responds with a cascade of emotions, inadequacy, resentment, and the desperate need to close the gap. The problem isn't that you feel envy. The problem is what you do with it. There are two paths. Path 1, let envy consume you. Let it turn you into Jane Williams, someone who destroys from the inside out, who builds relationships on hidden competition, who can never celebrate another person's joy because it highlights their own perceived lack. This is the path of the envier, and it's more common than you think. The envier is the friend who's always a little too interested in your failures, the coworker who congratulates you with a smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes, the family member who compares your life to theirs at every opportunity and always finds a way to come out ahead, at least in their own mind. They won't attack you directly. That's not how envy works. Envy is a guerrilla war, small, deniable operations that cumulatively erode your confidence and your sense of reality. The most dangerous enviers are the ones closest to you, because envy requires proximity. You don't envy billionaires you've never met. They're too far away, too abstract. You envy the person one rung above you on the ladder, the colleague who got the promotion you wanted, the friend whose relationship seems happier than yours, the sibling who always got more praise. Path 2, transform envy into emulation. Instead of resenting someone's success, study it. Instead of asking, why them and not me? Ask, what did they do that I can learn from? Instead of pulling them down, use their example as a spark for your own ascent. This is harder, much harder. It requires you to sit with the discomfort of inferiority instead of rushing to neutralize it. It requires you to acknowledge your envy, name it, feel it, own it, and then deliberately choose a different response. But this is the path of growth, the path of genuine self-improvement, the path that transforms the poison of comparison into the medicine of motivation. But there's a related force that's even more dangerous than envy. And it's the force that destroys the successful from the inside out. It's called grandiosity. Grandiosity is what happens when your opinion of yourself disconnects from reality. Not in a clinical, delusional way, in a slow, insidious way that creeps up on you with every success, every compliment, every milestone. The more you achieve, the more evidence you accumulate that you're exceptional. And the more evidence you accumulate, the more you start to believe it, not just that you're talented, not just that you work hard, but that you're fundamentally different from other people. That you see things they can't see. That you're capable of things they're not. That the normal rules, the rules that govern ordinary people, don't apply to you. And once that belief takes root, it changes everything. In the 1980s, a man named Michael Eisner took over the Walt Disney Company and performed what looked like a miracle. Under his leadership, Disney went from a sleepy, struggling studio to the most powerful entertainment company in the world. Hit after hit, record profits, universal acclaim. Eisner was celebrated as the savior of Disney, the genius who had resurrected a dying empire. And with each triumph, Eisner's self-image expanded. He began to see himself not just as a successful executive, but as the heir to Walt Disney himself. He started making decisions based not on what was best for the company, but on what fed his growing sense of destiny. He chose the location for Euro Disney not because the economics made sense, but because Paris was more prestigious than the alternatives. It was a financial disaster that cost the company billions. He grew paranoid about his top executives, particularly Jeffrey Katzenberg, the brilliant producer who had been responsible for many of Disney's biggest hits. Eisner couldn't stand sharing the spotlight. The idea that someone else might be getting credit for Disney's success was unbearable, so he fired Katzenberg. And in doing so, he drove away the very person who had been fueling Disney's creative renaissance. Eisner's grandiosity told him he didn't need anyone, that his instincts were infallible, that anyone who challenged him was either jealous or disloyal, that the rules of ordinary business, the need for talented partners, the value of dissent, the importance of luck didn't apply to someone of his caliber. And Disney, the company he had rescued from obscurity, began to crumble around him. Grandiosity is the success delusion, the belief that your achievements are entirely the result of your own brilliance, ignoring the role of luck, timing, team effort, and circumstance. And it doesn't just affect CEOs. It affects anyone who has ever achieved something and let it go to their head. The athlete who stops training because talent has always been enough. The entrepreneur who stops listening to advisors because their gut has always been right. The partner who stops trying because they believe they're the prize in the relationship. The social media star who believes their following means they're wise. The pattern is always the same. Success inflates the ego, the inflated ego makes reckless decisions, the reckless decisions lead to failure, and the failure, instead of deflating the ego, often makes it worse because the grandiose mind can't accept that the failure was its own fault. It must be sabotage, betrayal, bad luck, someone else's failure. The antidote to grandiosity isn't humility in the sense of thinking less of yourself. It's honesty. The honest acknowledgement that you are not self-made, that your success was a collaboration between your effort and 1,000 factors you didn't control, the family you were born into, the education you received, the economy you entered, the people who believed in you before you had anything to show for it, that the people around you contributed more than you'll ever admit. That luck, pure, undeserved, random luck, played a bigger role than you're comfortable accepting. And that the moment you forget those things, the universe will remind you. Usually in the most painful way possible. But there's something even more powerful than envy and grandiosity combined. Something that doesn't just distort how you see yourself, it distorts how you see everyone. It's the force that makes intelligent people do stupid things in groups. The force that turns reasonable individuals into an unreasoning mob. The force that has been responsible for the most catastrophic collective decisions in human history. And you're under its influence right now. You just don't feel it. Because when it's working perfectly, you don't feel anything at all. You think you're an individual. You think the opinions you hold are your own, that the beliefs you carry were arrived at through careful thought, that the person you are in a group is the same person you are alone, that your values are immovable and your convictions are solid. You're wrong. And the proof is sitting in your pocket, on your screen, in every comment section you've ever scrolled through, in every outrage cycle you've ever participated in every opinion you've held that happened to align perfectly with the opinions of everyone around you and that you've never once questioned. When you enter a group, any group, something happens to you, something invisible and profound. You don't just join the group joins you. It gets inside your head. It changes how you think, how you feel, what you believe, what you're willing to do, what you're willing to say, what you're willing to believe about people who aren't in the group. And you don't even notice. In the summer of 1966, a 16-year-old boy named Gao Jianhua was sitting in a classroom in China when the world turned upside down. Mao Zedong had launched the Cultural Revolution, and the instructions from the top were clear. The old ways were corrupt. The teachers were enemies. The system needed to be torn down and rebuilt from the ground up. The young people would lead the way. Jianhua was a quiet, bookish kid. He liked studying. He respected his teachers. He had no interest in politics or revolution. If you had asked him a week earlier what he wanted to do with his life, he would have said, study hard, get a good job, make his parents proud. But something happened when the group around him started to change. His classmates, kids he'd known for years, kids he'd eaten lunch with, kids he'd copied homework from, began wearing red armbands. They started shouting slogans. They stopped doing their homework and started holding struggle sessions, publicly humiliating their teachers for crimes that had been invented the night before. And slowly, imperceptibly, Jianhua began to change too. At first, it was just going along. He attended the meetings because everyone attended the meetings. He repeated the slogans because everyone repeated the slogans. He kept his head down and tried not to stand out because standing out in a revolution was dangerous. But then something shifted inside him. The slogans stopped feeling alien and started feeling natural. The anger that had been performative became genuine. The enemy, the teachers, the intellectuals, the old ways stopped seeming like people and started seeming like obstacles that needed to be removed, like vermin infesting a house that needed to be cleaned. He wasn't pretending anymore, he believed. And the reason he believed wasn't logic. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't even personal experience. His teachers had been kind to him. The old ways had served him well. It was the group. The group had gotten inside his mind and rearranged the furniture. And the new arrangement felt so natural that he couldn't remember what the old one looked like. This is not a story about China in the 1960s. This is a story about you. Right now, today. Because the same force that transformed Gao Jianhua, the force that makes individuals dissolve into collectives, and think with one mind, is operating on you through every group you belong to. Your political party, your social media feed, your workplace culture, your friend group, your nation, your generation, your fandom, your ideology. And the mechanism is always the same. First, imitation. Without realizing it, you adopt the group's mannerisms, speech patterns, and habits. You dress like them, you talk like them. You start using the same phrases, the same references, the same inside jokes. You laugh at things that aren't funny because the group is laughing. Then, conformity of thought. You stop questioning the group's assumptions because questioning them feels like betraying the group. You start to genuinely believe what the group believes, not because you've examined the evidence, but because belonging feels more important than being right. And the cost of dissent, social exclusion, the loss of status, the fear of being cast out is too painful to bear. Then emotional contagion. When the group is angry, you feel angry. When the group is afraid, you feel afraid. When the group is euphoric, you feel euphoric. When the group is outraged, your blood pressure rises even if you don't fully understand what you're outraged about. These emotions seem like your own, but they're not their infections, passed from person to person like a virus through the most contagious medium ever created, the human nervous system. And finally, risk escalation. In a group, you're willing to do things you'd never do alone, say things you'd never say, attack people you'd never attack, destroy reputations you'd normally protect, because the group provides cover, because everyone's doing it, because accountability dissolves in the collective. This is how mob mentality works. Not through conscious choice, through unconscious transformation. Not because people decide to become irrational, but because rationality itself is a group function. And when the group goes mad, individual rationality goes with it. And it's happening right now, on a scale that previous generations couldn't have imagined. Social media isn't just a communication tool. It's a group formation machine, the most powerful one ever created. It can assemble a mob of millions in hours. It can weaponize emotional contagion at the speed of light. It can turn a reasonable person into an unthinking partisan in a matter of weeks. And the algorithm doesn't care whether the group is right or wrong. It only cares about engagement, which means it rewards the emotions that bind groups together most tightly. Outrage, fear, tribal loyalty, and the intoxicating pleasure of feeling superior to outsiders. But groups aren't just dangerous to your thinking, they're dangerous to your leaders. Because here's the thing about groups. They're fickle. They'll elevate someone to godlike status one day and tear them down the next. They'll follow a leader with passionate devotion until that leader shows a single moment of weakness, a single flash of doubt, a single failure to live up to the fantasy the group has projected onto them. And then they turn. This is the law of fickleness, the understanding that authority is never permanent, loyalty is never unconditional, and the crowd's love is the most dangerous thing a leader can depend on. Because the crowd doesn't love you, it loves the idea of you. And when the idea and the reality diverge, the crowd doesn't adjust its idea. It destroys its idol. The leaders who last, the ones who maintain authority over time, understand something that most people don't. Authority isn't given, it's earned. Not once, but continuously, every day. Through consistency, through results, through the willingness to make hard decisions that the group doesn't want to make but secretly needs someone to make. And the leaders who fall, they're the ones who start believing their own myth, who confuse the crowd's adoration with genuine loyalty, who forget that the same people chanting their name today will be chanting for their head tomorrow if the winds change. So what do? How do you protect yourself from the group mind without becoming a hermit? How do you belong without losing yourself? You develop what we might call inner independence. This doesn't mean rejecting all groups. It means belonging to them consciously, being aware of when the group is influencing your thinking, catching yourself in moments of emotional contagion and asking, is this how I actually feel, or is this how the group wants me to feel? It means cultivating the habit of questioning your own opinions, especially the ones that align perfectly with your group's opinions. Because if every belief you hold happens to be identical to every belief your friends hold, that's not conviction. That's conformity wearing conviction's mask. It means seeking out perspectives that challenge your own. Not to change your mind, although that might happen, but to test whether your beliefs are actually yours or whether you borrowed them from the crowd. And it means having the courage to disagree, not aggressively, not disruptively, but honestly, quietly, in a way that preserves your integrity without attacking the group. Because the person who can think clearly inside a group, while everyone else is losing their mind. That person is rare. That person is valuable. That person is the one who sees the disaster coming while the rest of the group is still celebrating. But there's one more thing about groups, something that most people never see. The aggression that individuals suppress, the hostility, the anger, the desire to dominate doesn't disappear inside a group. It multiplies. And the most dangerous form of that aggression doesn't come at you with fists. It comes at you with a smile. The most dangerous person in your life isn't the one who yells at you. It's the one who never raises their voice. It's the coworker who agrees to help you and then conveniently forgets. It's the partner who says, whatever you want, in a tone that makes it clear you'd better not want what you want. It's the friend who gives you advice that subtly sabotages your confidence. It's the family member who offers help that creates obligation. It's the neighbor who smiles at you every morning and reports your fence to the city every afternoon. It's the person who wounds you with a compliment, who punishes you with patience, who destroys you with kindness. That's not kindness, that's not patience, that's not diplomacy. That's aggression. Weaponized, disguised, and nearly impossible to defend against, because how do you fight someone who's being nice? We tend to think of aggression as loud, physical, obvious, a punch, a threat, a door slammed in your face, a screaming match that leaves the walls shaking. And yes, that kind of aggression exists. It's the easy kind to identify and the easy kind to protect yourself from, because at least you know what you're dealing with. The enemy is in plain sight. But the aggression that does the most damage in modern life isn't loud. It's quiet. It operates through delays and omissions, through information strategically withheld, through commitments made and conveniently forgotten, through subtle undermining a word here, a glance there, a pattern of tiny erosions that cumulatively dismantle your confidence, your reputation, or your project. Psychologists call it passive aggression, but that name doesn't capture how devastating it is. A better name would be stealth warfare. Here's how it works. The passive aggressor has the same hostile impulses as any angry person, but they can't express those impulses directly because direct aggression is socially punished. You can't just tell your boss you hate them. You can't just sabotage your rival openly. You can't just attack someone without consequences. So the aggression goes underground. It resurfaces in forms that are deniable, actions that can be explained away, words that have two meanings, one for the record, one for the target. I didn't realize you were so sensitive. I was just trying to help. If that's how you want to take it, I can't stop you. I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just saying other people might see it differently. Every one of those phrases is a weapon. Everyone is designed to wound while preserving the aggressor's ability to say, "What? I didn't do anything wrong." And the target, you, in other words, is left with a strange, disorienting feeling. You know you've been attacked. You can feel the sting. But you can't point to the weapon. You can't name the crime. And if you try to fight back, you look like the crazy one. You look like the aggressor. That's the genius of passive aggression. It makes you doubt your own perception. The most common forms of passive aggression in modern life. Sabotage through incompetence. Agreeing to do something and then doing it poorly or not at all so that you have to fix it yourself or suffer the consequences. I tried my best, I guess I'm just not good at this. And somehow, their incompetence always seems to affect your projects most directly. Strategic delay. Promising to deliver something and then missing every deadline, forcing you to either wait endlessly or do it yourself. I haven't forgotten, I've just been really busy. And somehow, they're always too busy to help you but never too busy to help themselves. Backhanded praise. You're so brave for wearing that. I wish I had your confidence. You always say exactly what's on your mind. I admire that. You're really smart for someone who didn't go to a good school. Information withholding. Knowing something you need to know and not telling you, then acting surprised when you fail. Oh, I assumed you knew about the meeting. Guilt tripping. Making their needs seem so overwhelming that you feel guilty for having needs of your own. I guess I'll just do it myself. Again. Don't worry about me, I'm used to being disappointed. Every one of these tactics has the same structure, plausible deniability. The aggressor can always say they didn't mean it, didn't know, didn't realize. And you're left standing there, holding a wound you can't prove you received. So how do you fight back? Not with counter-aggression. That's what the passive aggressor wants, to pull you into the open, make you look like the attacker, and then play the victim. The moment you raise your voice, they win. The moment you lose your temper, they get to say, "See, you're the one with the problem." Not with confrontation, at least not directly, because calling out passive aggression is like trying to grab smoke. You did that on purpose? No, I didn't, you're overthinking it. And now you're the paranoid one. The most effective counter-strategy is to do something the passive aggressor never expects. You name the behavior. Calmly, specifically, without accusation, without emotion. I notice that whenever we agree on a deadline, you miss it. This has happened 4 times now. What's going on? Not, "You're doing this on purpose." Not, "You're passive-aggressive." Just the facts, the observable pattern, delivered with the calm energy of someone who sees the game and isn't playing. Because passive aggression depends on the target not seeing the pattern. The moment you name the pattern, the moment you shine a light on it, it loses its power. The passive aggressor has to either admit the behavior, which they won't, or change it, because they know you're watching. And if they escalate, if they go from covert aggression to overt hostility, good, because overt aggression you can deal with. Overt aggression is visible. Overt aggression has consequences. Overt aggression can be addressed by HR, by the legal system, by the social norms that still function when the aggression is undeniable. The hidden war ends the moment it becomes visible. But there's another kind of hidden war, one that doesn't happen between people, it happens inside you. It's the war between who you're supposed to be and who you actually are. And it's a war you've been losing your whole life. Every culture, every society, every community has rules about what men should be and what women should be. And from the moment you were born, those rules started shaping you, cutting away parts of yourself that didn't fit, amplifying parts that did, and burying everything else so deep that you forgot it was there. If you're a man, you were taught to be strong, decisive, unemotional, rational, dominant, competitive, stoic. And any part of you that was tender, vulnerable, intuitive, nurturing, or emotionally expressive was pushed underground, punished by other boys, dismissed by adults, ridiculed by the culture. If you're a woman, you were taught to be caring, cooperative, modest, emotional, agreeable, supportive, and any part of you that was ambitious, aggressive, competitive, intellectually dominant, or sexually assertive was pushed underground, labeled unfeminine, bossy, difficult, or worse. But here's the thing about the parts of you that got buried. They didn't die. They're still there, still alive, still influencing your behavior from the shadows, showing up in your relationships, your career choices, your unexplained anxieties, your impossible standards for yourself and others. And the energy it takes to keep those parts buried. It's enormous. It's the energy you could be using to create, to connect, to live fully. Instead, you're spending it on maintaining a gender performance that was never designed for you. It was designed for the convenience of the culture. The woman who reconnects with her competitive fire, who allows herself to be ambitious without apology, who claims her intellectual authority, who leads without waiting for permission, who embraces her anger as a valid and powerful emotion, becomes something extraordinary. Not less feminine, more complete, more herself. The man who reconnects with his emotional depth, who allows himself to be vulnerable without shame, who listens without needing to dominate, who nurtures without feeling diminished, who admits fear without feeling destroyed, becomes something magnetic. Not less masculine, more whole. This isn't about abandoning your gender identity. It's about expanding it, reclaiming the territory that was taken from you before you were old enough to know it was yours. Because the most powerful people, the ones who seem to have an almost supernatural ability to influence, to connect, to create, aren't the ones who most perfectly embody their gender role. They're the ones who transcend it. Not by rejecting masculinity or femininity, by integrating both. By becoming, for the first time in their lives, fully themselves. But there's one final force. One that sits beneath all the others, beneath masks and shadows and envy and aggression and the tribal mind. It's the force that explains why you're still drifting, why you haven't found your purpose, why you keep looking at the clock and wondering where the time went. And unlike the other forces, this one doesn't hide from you. You hide from it. You are going to die. Not today, hopefully. Not tomorrow, probably. But someday. And when that day comes, everything you've accumulated, the money, the status, the possessions, the followers, the achievements, the perfectly curated digital footprint will mean nothing. The only thing that will matter is what you did with the time you had. Now that's not a pleasant thought, and your brain knows it, which is why your brain has developed an extraordinary ability to avoid thinking about it. You distract yourself. You stay busy. You fill every moment with noise, notifications, entertainment, drama, gossip, outrage, shopping, scrolling, anything to drown out the ticking clock. You maintain an unbreakable schedule not because you're disciplined, but because silence terrifies you. Because in the silence, the question rises, what is this all for? But the clock doesn't stop, and the void doesn't shrink. It grows. Most people live their lives in a state of aimlessness, not misery aimlessness. The quiet, gray, directionless feeling of going through the motions. Waking up doing what's expected, going to sleep repeating. Not unhappy exactly, not lost exactly, just drifting, like a boat whose engine has died, carried by currents it can't see toward a destination it never chose. And drift is the most dangerous thing in the world, because drift is comfortable. Drift doesn't demand anything from you. Drift lets you believe you have plenty of time, that you'll figure it out eventually, that the purpose will reveal itself if you just wait long enough. Until you don't. In 1948, a 19-year-old named Michael King was sitting in a church in Atlanta, Georgia, trying to figure out what to do with his life. His father, the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., wanted him to become a preacher. It was the family business, the expected path, the safe path, the path that would keep Michael close to home and under his father's considerable influence. But Michael wasn't sure. He'd considered medicine, law, sociology. He'd bounced from one interest to another, unable to commit, unable to find the thing that felt like his, not his father's, not society's, but his. He enrolled in seminary mostly to please his father and discovered that he loved the intellectual life. The theology, the philosophy, the deep engagement with ideas. For the first time, he felt the thrill of a mind coming alive. But even that wasn't purpose. It was pleasure. It was stimulation. It wasn't the thing that would make his life feel like it mattered. He was still drifting, just drifting in a more interesting direction. Then something happened that would change the course of American history. And it started with a choice, the first truly autonomous choice of his life. Michael, who would soon change his name to Martin, chose to pastor a church in Montgomery, Alabama, instead of his father's church in Atlanta. It was a smaller church, a less prestigious position, a more dangerous city for a black man with a young family. Everyone thought it was a mistake. But it was his. For the first time, he wasn't following someone else's script. He was writing his own. And then, almost immediately after he arrived, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus. The Montgomery bus boycott began, and the 26-year-old pastor, who wasn't sure he was meant to lead suddenly, found himself at the center of the most important social movement in American history. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't predicted it. He hadn't even sought it. But he was there, in position, ready, not because he had prepared for this specific moment, but because he had made one brave, autonomous choice that put him in the path of history. Purpose didn't come to him as a vision. It didn't arrive with trumpets and a clear plan. It didn't descend from the sky with a fully formed strategy attached. It arrived as a crisis that demanded a response. And the only reason he was in position to respond, the only reason he was in Montgomery and not Atlanta, was because he had made one brave, autonomous choice. Purpose is like that. It doesn't announce itself with certainty. It emerges through engagement, through action, through the willingness to step into situations where you're not sure what to do, but you know you have to do something. And most people never find it, not because it isn't there, but because they're waiting for it to arrive fully formed. They're waiting for the moment of absolute clarity, the burning bush, the voice from the sky, the sign from the universe. It doesn't come that way. Purpose is quieter than that. It starts as a whisper, a pull toward something you can't fully articulate, an interest that persists despite your attempts to ignore it. A pattern of attraction that shows up in your earliest memories and keeps showing up, year after year, until you either follow it or bury it. And most people bury it. Because following it means risk. It means disappointing people who had different plans for you. It means uncertainty. It means walking away from the comfortable, the expected, the approved path. It means becoming the kind of person who makes others uncomfortable because your willingness to pursue your purpose reminds them that they've abandoned theirs. And drift is so much easier than purpose. But here's the paradox. Purpose isn't just about meaning, it's about power. The person with a sense of purpose has an energy that the drifter can't match. They can endure setbacks that would break someone without direction. They can resist the pull of the group because they have their own compass. They can make decisions quickly because they have a criterion, not what's easiest, but what serves the mission. They can tolerate loneliness because purpose is company enough. They can survive criticism because they're not performing for approval, they're building something that matters to them. They can outlast competitors who are motivated only by money or status because purpose doesn't run out the way those things do. Purpose doesn't guarantee success, but it guarantees that your failures mean something, and that more than any achievement is what makes a life feel worthwhile. But there's something else, something that sits beneath even purpose. It's the force that makes purpose possible or impossible. The force that determines whether you spend your years running towards something or running away from something. The force that separates the people who live fully from the people who merely exist. It's the force that no one wants to talk about. The force that every culture in history has tried to deny, disguise, or distract from. Death. You spend your life pretending death isn't real. Not consciously, you know intellectually that you're mortal, but you live as if you have infinite time. You postpone the conversation, you delay the trip, you put off the change. You tell yourself you'll do it later, when you're ready, when you have more money, when the timing is right, when the kids are older, when the mortgage is paid, when you're not so tired. And later never comes. Because the clock is always ticking, and you're always running out of time, and the most precious resource you have, the only resource that can never be replaced, never be earned back, never be bought or borrowed, is slipping through your fingers right now. Every second gone. Most people find this thought unbearable, so they avoid it. They fill their lives with distraction and consumption and drama. They chase status and accumulation and pleasure, anything to create the illusion that time isn't passing, that the end isn't approaching, that this isn't all temporary. The entertainment industry exists largely to help you forget that you're going to die. The fitness industry sells you the fantasy that you can stop time. The beauty industry sells you the illusion that aging is optional. Social media sells you the belief that you can curate a permanent self that exists outside the reach of mortality. But there's another response to the awareness of death. A response that transforms it from a source of anxiety into a source of power. A response that doesn't deny mortality but uses it as fuel. The ancient Stoics practiced something called memento mori, remember that you must die. Not as a morbid exercise, as a clarity exercise, as a way of cutting through the noise and asking the only question that matters. If this were my last year, my last month, my last day, would I be doing this? Would I be in this job? Would I be in this relationship? Would I be having this argument? Would I be scrolling through this feed? Would I be worrying about this opinion? Would I be holding this grudge? Would I be waiting for permission? Most of the time, the answer is no. And that no is the most valuable information you'll ever receive, because it tells you what to stop doing. And stopping the wrong things is the first step towards starting the right ones. Death awareness doesn't make you morbid, it makes you urgent. Not in a panicked, grasping way, in a focused, deliberate way. When you know your time is limited, you stop wasting it. You stop tolerating things that drain you. You stop deferring the conversations you need to have, the changes you need to make, the life you need to start living. You stop caring so much about what other people think, because in the face of death, the opinions of strangers shrink to their actual size, which is microscopic. You start saying no to things you don't want to do, because every yes to something meaningless is a no to something meaningful. You start right now, imperfectly, without all the answers, moving toward whatever matters most. There's a reason that some of the most purposeful people in history have been the ones who stared death in the face and refused to look away. They didn't have more time than you. They had less. But they used it differently, because they knew not intellectually, but in their bones that every moment is borrowed. And borrowed things should be used wisely. Purpose is the answer to aimlessness. Death awareness is the catalyst for purpose. And together, they create something that most people never experience. A life that feels like it was yours. Not your parents', not your culture's, not the algorithms, not your bosses', not your partner's, not your children's, yours. Chosen, lived, felt, owned. So here's the question. What are you waiting for? The clock is ticking, the void is waiting, and every moment you spend drifting is a moment you will never get back. You don't need permission, you don't need certainty, you don't need a plan, you don't need to be ready, you will never be ready. You need to start now. And as you start, as you begin the work of living on purpose, of seeing clearly, of becoming who you actually are, you'll discover something unexpected. You're not alone in this. Every force of human nature that we've explored, every dark impulse, every hidden pattern, every mask and shadow and poison, it has a counterpart, a higher expression, a transformation. And that transformation is the whole point. We started with a stranger. The stranger inside you, the one who acts without your permission, who feels what you don't want to feel, who drives your behavior from the shadows while you tell yourself you're in control. We've spent the last 2.5 hours getting to know that stranger. We've looked at the puppet strings, the irrationality that makes you think you're rational. We've examined the mirror, the narcissism that turns other people into reflections of yourself. We've seen the masks, the gap between what people show and what they hide. We've felt the hunger, the insatiable desire that keeps you wanting what you can't have. We've hit the wall, the defensiveness that makes people resist you and makes you resist change. We've entered the shadow, the dark side you refuse to see. We've tasted the poison, the envy and grandiosity that destroy from within. We've witnessed the tribal mind, the way groups make you stupid and leaders make you dependent. We've uncovered the hidden war, the aggression that smiles at you while it cuts you down, and the gender prison that keeps you playing a role you never chose. And we've faced the void, the aimlessness and death denial that keep you drifting through the only life you'll ever have. It's a lot, it's heavy, and if you're feeling overwhelmed, good. Because that overwhelm, that discomfort, that feeling of wanting to look away, that's awareness, and awareness is the beginning of everything. Here's what most people get wrong about human nature. They think that understanding the darkness means giving into it. They think that acknowledging the shadow means becoming the shadow. They think that seeing the puppet strings means you're a puppet. But it's the opposite. The people who are truly controlled by these forces are the ones who don't see them, the ones who believe their anger is always justified, the ones who think their masks are their real faces, the ones who are so consumed by envy they can't even name it, the ones who drift through life without purpose and wonder why they feel empty. Seeing the strings doesn't make you a puppet, it makes you the one who can cut them. Every force we've explored has two sides, a lower expression and a higher one. The lower is automatic, it operates without your consent, without your awareness, without your choice. The higher requires effort. It requires the very thing we've been talking about, awareness. Irrationality, transformed through awareness, becomes genuine rationality, not the cold, emotionless kind, but the kind that sees emotions as data rather than commands, that can feel fear and act wisely anyway. Narcissism, transformed through empathy, becomes the ability to truly understand and connect with other people, the most powerful social skill in existence. The mask, transformed through authenticity, becomes the ability to present yourself with intention, not hiding, not performing, but choosing how you show up in the world. The hunger for more, transformed through discipline, becomes creative ambition, the drive to build rather than merely consume, to create rather than acquire. Defensiveness, transformed through openness, becomes genuine influence, the ability to move people not by force but by connection, not by argument but by understanding. The shadow, transformed through integration, becomes wholeness, the rare, magnetic quality of someone who has nothing left to hide, because they've already faced everything they were afraid to see. Envy, transformed through emulation, becomes the fuel for self-improvement, the ability to be inspired by greatness instead of threatened by it. Grandiosity, transformed through realism, becomes grounded confidence, the kind that comes from actual achievement rather than inflated self-image, the kind that doesn't need to shout because it's already been proven. The tribal mind, transformed through independence, becomes genuine community, belonging without conformity, connection without surrender. Passive aggression, transformed through honesty, becomes direct, respectful communication, the courage to say what you mean without hiding behind deniability. Gender rigidity, transformed through integration, becomes authentic identity, the freedom to be fully yourself, drawing from the complete spectrum of human qualities. Aimlessness, transformed through purpose, becomes a life that means something, a life that feels like it was chosen, not endured. And death denial, transformed through awareness, becomes the ultimate freedom, the freedom to live fully because you know, truly know, that your time is limited, that every day is a gift you didn't earn and can't keep, that the only appropriate response to the brief, improbable miracle of being alive is to live. This is the journey. Not from bad to good, not from darkness to light, from unconscious to conscious, from automatic to chosen, from puppet to master. And it's not a journey that ends. There is no finish line where you become perfectly rational, perfectly empathic, perfectly whole. You will always have the shadow. You will always feel the pull of the group. You will always struggle with envy, with grandiosity, with the desire for more. But now you have a map. You can see the terrain. You know where the traps are. You understand the forces that have been driving you and driving everyone around you since before you were born. And that understanding, that clarity, is the most powerful weapon you will ever possess. Not against other people, against the lower self, the automatic self, the self that sleeps through life and wakes up at the end wondering where the years went. You're awake now. The question is, what are you going to do with your awareness? Because knowing all of this, understanding the laws of human nature, is worthless if you don't act on it. If you listen to this and go back to the same patterns, the same reactions, the same drift, then nothing has changed. You've been entertained but not transformed. But if you start even one thing, even today, even imperfectly, something shifts. You catch yourself before the angry outburst. You notice the envy and name it instead of acting on it. You see the mask and look for what's behind it. You step back from the group and ask, is this really what I believe? You feel the pull of drift and choose direction instead. You choose purpose over drift, honesty over manipulation, integration over repression, life over death denial. And slowly, gradually, the stranger inside you stops being a stranger. You become, for the first time, someone you actually know. That's the gift of understanding human nature. Not control over others, control over yourself. Not power over the world, power over the only thing you can truly control. Who you choose to become. Before the clock runs out.